As children, me and my little brother would always race each other through the air vents in our house to see who could get to their room faster. Dad would always tell us not to do it, since one of us could get stuck. But we never believed him, so we just did it when he wasn't around. He was probably just tired of us always popping out of a vent and scaring him. I would win pretty much every time at first, but eventually I started having trouble moving in the tight spaces due to my growing body, while my brother would only get better and better until our roles had reversed and suddenly he was the one always beating me. It wasn't that I was getting slower, quite the opposite in fact. Something inside me said that if I moved too fast through the vents, I would eventually get stuck. So I stopped racing. This ticked my little brother off. "You're just mad because you're losing," he would shout. I ignored him and went up to my room. After about half an hour, my dad called and said that he was going to be late from work, and to unload the dishwasher and to get my little brother to help rake the leaves outside. It was pretty normal for my dad to be late, so I did as I was told without questioning it. It was only when I went to rake the leaves that I noticed something was wrong. 45 minutes had passed since I came home from school with my little brother, and yet I hadn't seen him since getting there. That wasn't normal. He was always bugging me to play with him, or do something stupid that would get us in trouble, and I would always turn him down. Had he finally given up? No, that didn't seem like him. I assumed something had happened at school that upset him, unless he was still mad at me about the vent thing. But that wouldn't make any sense. If it was me, he would probably just try to punch me or something like that. It must have been something I didn't know about. I went up to his room, but he wasn't there. I searched the entire house, but I didn't find him anywhere. If he left, I probably would have heard the front door opening. I searched again, this time looking through each and every nook and cranny that he could be hiding in, all the while calling his name. I was about to give up and say that he ran out when I wasn't paying attention and call the police. And that's when I heard him crying. "Donnie, where are you?" No response. "Okay, come on out, Donnie. This isn't funny anymore." "I can't," he said between heavy sobs. It felt like I was talking to a ghost. Where the heck was he? And that's when it clicked for me. There was only one place that I hadn't checked yet. The air vents. "Donnie, are you stuck in the air vent?" Through his whimpers, I managed to make out an, "Uh-huh." Suddenly, my mind was racing. My first thought was to call the police, but then it hit me. Dad doesn't know about the air vent racing. If he found out, he would never let it go. Heck, he probably wouldn't let us do anything by ourselves ever again. That left only one option. "Hang in there, Donnie. I'm coming to get you." "Okay." This was crazy, but what choice did I have? Grabbing a flashlight from my dad's toolbox, I forced my way into the basement's air vent. It was a tight squeeze. I had to ram my body against the sides of the vent in order to stretch it open enough for me to move easily. With the flashlight in my mouth, I started crawling through the vent like a mole, trying my hardest to follow my little brother's cries. They reverberated off the walls so much that it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. Eventually, I found that I had looped back around to the same place that I had started. This was getting nowhere. If my brother was trapped anywhere, It had to be the narrow part of the vent in the center of the house, near the boiler. I went there and shone my flashlight through, but saw nothing. Dang, where was he? I only had a little bit of time before Dad came home, and then I would have to explain the whole thing to him. I tried calling out again. Donnie, where are you? I don't know. Great, thanks for the help, Donnie. What room are you closest to? I can't tell, he said. Donnie, listen to the sound of my voice. What direction is it coming from? I don't know, he said. Right, the reverberations. What about before? Right before I came in here, was I close or far away? You were close, I think. Really close. So he was near the basement, but that didn't make any sense. I had already checked out the vents near the basement. He must have been in the upstairs shaft. I'm really sorry, he cried. I could hear his voice echoing from all around me. It was like he was talking to me from every direction. I wanted to crawl through the basement vent to your room so I could jump out and scare you, but then I got stuck. I just wanted to show you that I could crawl through the air vents with no problems. I'm so sorry. His wailing got louder. It was super annoying. Listen, Donnie, I'm going to get you out of here, so stop crying, okay? He must have listened, because he calmed down a little bit after that. But at least he gave me an important clue. His destination. I retraced my steps through the vent back to the basement, following the dent that I had made in the sides. And then I proceeded to crawl through the basement vent shaft towards my bedroom. Doing this brought back a lot of memories for me, but at the same time, I remembered why I had stopped. By the time I was on the other side, I was covered in bruises and cuts, and most importantly, I hadn't seen any sign of my little brother. It didn't make any sense. He knew the layout of the vent shaft better than I did. There was no way he would have gotten lost. I called down to him again. Donnie, what route were you using to get to my room? The shortest route, he said. That was the route that I took. I couldn't have possibly missed him. The two of us couldn't even fit in any of the vent shafts together anyway. Was it possible that he knew a shorter route than I did? It seemed hard to believe, but there didn't appear to be very many other possibilities. Begrudgingly, I went back through the vent shaft, this time exploring every path that forked off from the one I believed to be the shortest. When I found myself back in the basement, I turned around to look again. This repeated multiple times, to the point where I even drew up a map to make sure I wasn't missing anything. He just wasn't anywhere. Of course, I hadn't considered the possibility that he might not actually be stuck. Instead, he was lying to make me crawl through the vent a bunch of times, as punishment for not racing him today. He could see my flashlight beam to know when to get out of the way in time, and since we had no other way of locating each other, he would be able to avoid me with ease. It was a far-fetched theory, but at this point, it was the only thing that made sense. Hey Donnie, stop being cruel. Just come out of there already. What do you mean? I can't move. His crying started up again, this time louder than ever. It didn't sound like he was lying. Eventually, Dad came home, and I explained everything that had happened. He wasn't nearly as angry as I had expected. and he seemed to agree that my theory was the only possible explanation for everything. He went into his toolbox and grabbed a handsaw, and then looked at me with a smirk. If he won't come out willingly, we'll have to just cut the vent open until he has nowhere left to hide. I wasn't sure if the property damage would be worth a little bit of revenge, but at the same time, my little brother could have left at any time he wanted. So, at the end of the day, he was the one to blame for the damage that was about to be caused. We went down into the basement again, this time following the underside of the vent shaft to its first cross-section. My dad placed the handsaw on the corner of the vent to start cutting. As soon as he made the first cut, everything went wrong. My little brother started squealing in pain, his voice echoing throughout the entire house. Blood poured down the saw and onto Dad's arm. He looked at me in horror and started shouting, "Quick, call an ambulance, now!" I rushed to the phone, but even as I was dialing the emergency number, I couldn't believe that I had searched so long for my little brother in those air vents and came up empty, while my dad was able to find him on his first try. The irony was too morbid to stomach. When I had returned, I saw that my dad had tried making another cut in the vent to try to reach in and pull him out, only to be met with more blood and more screaming. The two cuts were far enough apart from each other that they couldn't possibly have been both from my little brother, unless he was moving. "Stop it! That hurts!" he cried. My dad's solution to this was to simply start at the vent grate and keep cutting until he encountered more blood. But even by making a small cut at the entrance, he was met with blood and screams. It defied all common sense. His explanation was that the blood was coming from somewhere in the grate, and that cutting was causing the grate to rattle, which was agitating a wound my little brother had acquired at some point earlier. But I knew. And for a moment, I could have sworn the grate entrance looked like a face. Once the ambulances arrived, I was sent back up to my room. Not that it mattered. I could still hear everything from the vent in my room. No matter what room in the house that I was in, I couldn't escape his cries. "I'm so thirsty." That's when it dawned on me. There was one thing I still hadn't tried yet. I ran down into the kitchen and filled a big salad bowl with water, and then carried it up to my room, being extra careful not to spill anything. I then poured the water down into the vent shaft. "Hey Donnie, which way is the water coming from?" I listened closely for an answer, but received none. All I could hear were the sounds of someone drinking. Later that night, my grandparents came to pick me up, and I started living at their house. After a couple of days, my dad started living there too. Our old house was quarantined off by the government for a long time, until it was eventually demolished and another house was built right on top of it. Some old neighbors said that they took something away in a big semi-truck before demolishing the building, and there were a bunch of rumors at school about what had happened. As a teenager, I started having nightmares about my little brother being stuck in the air vents in my body, such as my respiratory system, digestive tract, or ear canals. It got to me so much that I started trying to destroy those air vents to make them go away. My dad and grandparents stopped me, and I told them about the nightmares. and they sent me to counseling, which I took until I was in my late 30s, when I was finally able to recover. I tried so hard to forget about this past event, but there was one thing that still bothered me. I couldn't work up the courage to ask my dad until he was already on his last legs. But the answer was one that I knew from the very beginning. Dad, why didn't we ever have a funeral for Donnie? He looked at me and smiled weakly. Donnie never died. I knew that already. I could still hear his cries.